While we may still have only a modest number of congregants joining us in person, we cannot express enough the powerful moment this represents. With the month of Elul beginning tonight and our congregants being welcomed back into the building for daily worship, for private Shechianu moments in front of the open ark, and Shabbat services, we are ushering in yet another new normal. This week, as we focus our attention on Parshat Rabbi, we find the commandment of the Shalosh Regalim, the three pilgrimage festivals, namely Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. Those were the festivals in ancient Israel when, if you were a Jewish person, you were asked to go and make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now, some of the people lived just a few miles from Jerusalem, and so it was not that large of an undertaking. But if you lived in the north, or you lived even beyond, making this pilgrimage could be a really, really big journey. The text is quite powerful here. Just as we heard from Rabbi Hoffman, it basically says that 3 times a year you need to be seen. As it is written, all of your mail should be seen, not empty-handed, in the house of the Holy One. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, comments that he loves these verses because it is a biblical way of saying that there are times in your life that you've got to simply show up. We all know these times when we have to show up. Think of your personal life. Your child is in the class play in elementary school. That is a mandatory show-up moment. Maybe it's a graduation or a bar mitzvah, a show-up moment. A shiva house or a hospital room, a friend's wedding chuppah or a significant anniversary or birthday. We don't always think of pilgrimage as one of those, but we're told 3 times, make the pilgrimage. Now for us, it's a good thing to make pilgrimage to Israel and to Jerusalem, but it is no longer really part of our holidays. We can observe Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuot wherever we are. So in many ways, we have lost a dimension that existed in our distant past, which is very different than, frankly, taking a trip. So being a tourist is not being a pilgrim. One of the thought leaders of the Reform movement, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, wrote a book called Israel, a Spiritual Travel Guide, a compendium for the modern Jewish pilgrim. And what he realized was that people went on trips to Israel and they thought they were going as tourists. And then they would go to certain places where historical memory was so powerful, like the old city of Jerusalem, or the Western Wall, or Masada, or the Tomb of David. And they realized that they were not tourists at all. They were pilgrims. And so he wrote a guidebook on how to awaken those pieces. Rabbi Hoffman writes, pilgrims come because being in this place is part of who they are, a necessary segment in the story of their lives. If they are on a journey not to leave home, but to come home, to a deeper place in their soul, then they are pilgrims. And in many ways, returning to the sacred space of Holy Blossom is a type of pilgrimage. That is not to say that 1950 Bathurst Street is akin to the holy city of Jerusalem, but rather a homecoming to a place that holds a deep significance in our spiritual lives. Parshat Rabbi teaches us that to observe a holiday is to end up in a different place than you started. That's part of what a pilgrim is. Someone who begins thinking and believing and acting in one way, but in their growth and in their discovery end up in a much deeper place. And that is why this Shabbat is unlike any other Shabbat at Holy Blossom. We have been on a journey, and we are returning home. And we must name the power of this moment. one of Moses' great gifts as a leader of the Jewish people, and one from which we can all learn, is that he framed reality for the group. He defined the situation, articulated our choices. In this week's Parsha, Moses told us where we are and where we are going. He showed us the map and the destination, and he helped us see why we should choose a specific route, the route of Torah. And at the beginning of Parshat Rabbi, Moses says, "See, I'm setting before you today the blessing and the curse. The blessing if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today. The curse if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I command you today by following other gods which you have not known." And in even more powerful words, this is how Moses puts it later in the book of Deuteronomy. "See, I set before you today life and the good, death and the bad. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witness against you, that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life, so you and your children after you may live." What Moses is doing here is defining reality for the next generation and for all generations. He's doing so as a preface to what is about to follow in the next few chapters, a systematic restatement of Jewish law, covering all aspects of life for the new land of Israel. Moses knows that the people often think and act in short-term ways, preferring the pleasures of today to tomorrow's happiness, personal advantage to the good of a society. People do foolish things, individually and collectively. And so throughout Devarim, Moses insists time and time again that the road to a long-term flourishing, to the good, to the blessing, that life itself consists in making one simple choice, and that is to listen. As the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks writes, listening is the key virtue of religious life. If we want God to listen to us, we have to be prepared to listen to God. And if we listen and learn to listen to God, then we eventually learn to listen to our fellow human beings. Returning to worship at Holy Blossom also requires a great deal of listening. For the grand meaning of any event is very rarely self-evident. All of life's moments are subject to interpretation. As he explains in his book on religion and science, entitled The Great Partnership, Rabbi Sacks teaches that there is a difference between the cause of something and its meaning. The search for causes is the task of an explanation, and the search for meaning is the work of interpretation. So science can explain, but it cannot interpret. We ask, were the 10 plagues in Egypt a natural sequence of events, or a divine punishment, or perhaps both? There is no scientific experiment that could resolve the question. Was the division of the Red Sea divine intervention in history, or a freak easterly wind exposing a submerged and ancient riverbank? Was the Exodus an act of divine liberation, or a series of lucky coincidences that allowed a group of fugitive slaves to escape? When all of the casual scientific explanations have been given, the quality of miracle, of a epic-changing event in which we see the hand of God, the quality of miracle remains. That culture is not nature. There are causes in scientific nature, but only in culture, only in the Jewish religion are there meanings. And we human beings are uniquely the culture-creating, meaning-seeking animal. And this affects everything that we do. Viktor Frankl, the psychotherapist who survived Auschwitz, used to emphasize that Our lives are determined not by what happens to us, but how we respond to what happens to us. And how we respond depends on how we interpret events. In the camps, he might ask, is this disaster the end of my world? Or is it life calling on me to exercise heroic strength so that I can survive and help others to survive? Identical circumstances may be interpreted differently by different people, leading one person to despair and another to heroic endurance. The facts may be the same, but the meanings are diametrically different. How we interpret the world affects how we respond to the world. And it is our responses that shape our lives, individually and collectively. So whether you are going to travel far on a pilgrimage, or maybe more likely this year it is an inward pilgrimage as we approach the month of Elul and the high holidays, I pray that we will each see ourselves not as tourists, but of one who journeys to discover, one who makes pilgrimage and creates meaning. For there are times in our spiritual lives that showing up matters. I believe the notion of showing up and being seen in the holy place of Jerusalem that we read in Parshat Rabbi was teaching not only about the holidays, the Shalosh Regalim, not only about pilgrimage, but about being present where and when it matters most. Showing up for our communities, showing up for our families, showing up in times of pain and sorrow, and showing up in moments of joy and simcha. We all know the people for whom we need to show up for, and the moments when we will make pilgrimage to do so. And so, because his words are so poignant, let's conclude by restating Rabbi Hoffman's words of wisdom. Pilgrims come because in this place is part of who they are, a necessary segment in the story of their lives. If they are on a journey not to leave home, but to come home to a deeper place in their soul, then they are pilgrims. My friends, as Holy Blossom opens its doors to you once again, I hope today and tomorrow and in the coming weeks, each of us, each in our own authentic way, will become pilgrims to our deeper, more profound selves. Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov.